In this episode, we journey to exquisite Loch Tulla to slay the beast of the Black Mount, Stob Ghabhar, and its neighbour, Stob Ghabhar. Along the way, we'll check into 320 years of history at the remote Inveroran hotel and discover Druim Liaghart, birthplace of Duncan Van Mcintyre, for a child's eye view of Gaelic clachan life in the feudal run-rig system. If you find yourself enjoying the show, hitting like and subscribing really helps the channel to grow and to create more free content like this for you to enjoy. Generally regarded as the finest of the Black Mount Munros, Stob Ghabhar is a sprawling leviathan covering an astounding 30 square kilometres. Its extensive ridges reaching all the way to Glen Coe and the Munros to the north. We begin in Bridge of Orchy, following the West Highland Way over Mcintyre to rejoin the road at the Inveroran Hotel. Crossing the bridge, a path leads along the north side of the river to the Clach hut, turning right beyond it to rise up the gentle slopes towards the Munros. A fine walk-in past the magnificent Anstaler leads to the foot of Stob Ghabhar's south ridge. A fairly direct ascent that rewards with excellent views of the surrounding landscape. Descending west to the Bealach with Stob Ghabhar, the walker may choose the classic route to the right, or the direct ascent of Untitled ahead. As we'll see, it pales somewhat in comparison to its more famous namesake in Glen Coe, but the ascent to the ridge crest is steep, stony, and exposed in intimidating surroundings. The ridge itself requires a traverse across a very narrow section, but thankfully it can be negotiated without any awkward scrambling. From here the ridge broadens to reach Stob Ghabhar's summit cone, where a brief final ascent will take you to the lofty summit. We'll look at alternate routes up Stob Ghabhar as we go, including a dramatic descent option by the beautiful waterfalls of Anstaler. In winter, Loch becomes a lethal arena of ice pitches, verglass rock steps and knife-edged snow arêtes, while the summit ridge can hold cornices so large that the summit may not be the highest point. If you don't have experience of exposed and insecure scrambling on hard terrain, the only winter option is the much easier west ridge, which we'll look at later in the show. Yo, here we are back at Bridge of Orchy. And for the first time in God knows how many times we've been here, we're actually going to cross the eponymous bridge. Well, yonder lies the way up Mcintyre. Let's head up into this wood and what looks like some young Scots pines. Here's a lovely spot under the trees. However, I should point out, over there someone's tried to start a fire. Do you really need me to tell you why that's a bad idea? I do try to keep the didactic content of this show to a minimum, but I've got to say, guys, sorry to be a party pooper here, but there's really no need for you to start a fire when you're outdoors. If you've got the right equipment, I can't really think of a reason why you would need to start a fire, especially this time of year when it's really dry. The grass is dry, the tree bark is dry, a lot of the tree branches will be dying off. They're going to catch light like that, okay? So that's great when it's on your fire. If your fire gets out of control, or not even that, if the embers go up into these trees would be history. Again, it's just a case of using your noggin, thinking of others and thinking of the environment that you're coming to visit. Because if everyone behaved like that and started fires down there wouldn't be any of this to see. Well, here we are, having risen out of the forest. What a smashing view of the Bridge of Orchy hills you get from this hill. Marvellous. Ben Doden, Ben Andoy, Ben Achalidar over there. Aha! looking majestic from near or afar, the snow-speckled slopes of Stob Ghabhar. Yowzer! The Black Mount and Glen Coe hills there. Aren't they spectacular? Such a lovely range when viewed from this aspect. Way over there in the distance is Ben Starav, slightly to its right on the skyline. Glash Van Voor. And we've got another pointy, majestic looking peak. Stob Ghabhar and Stob. And to its right there, Miel Nanun, rounded mountain of the birds. Over there, we've got the Goliath, Stob Ghabhar, and its pal, Stob Ghabhar. Now, as its name gives away, Victoria Bridge was much loved by Queen Victoria and her husband Albert. You can certainly see why it captivated them and still does captivate people. That fantastic view down there to Loch Tulla. Dorothy Wordsworth was another poet who found this place to be suitably inspiring. And her husband William as well, of course. Now, once you pass the end of the road down here, it's pretty much wilderness all the way over to Loch Tulla, beyond Ben Starav along there. This area is where we're hitting in the next few episodes. You can also walk along the road here, which has got to be one of the finest walk-ins you're likely to see in the area. Marvellous Scots pine and mixed woodlands all around. The fantastic sight of Loch Tulla over there, and the Bridge of Orchy Hills in the background. Makes for quite a saunter. Nestled on the shores of Loch Tulla since 1704, Inveroran is one of the oldest working hotels in Scotland. For over 300 years, the inn has sheltered travellers making the journey across the Black Mount to and from Glen Coe as routes evolved from a faint cattle path to the roads we see today. Inveroran most likely began as a staging post for the cattle drovers on their long journey to the cattle markets at Crieff and Falkirk. As we learned in our Ben Callum episode, cattle drovers created the first long-distance routes to and from the Highlands, many of which the military roads would later follow. The journey to and from the north necessitated an often highly unpleasant traverse of the boggy, midge-infested Rannoch Moor. The next shelter to the north was King's House at the mouth of Glen Coe, and Inveroran served either as a welcome respite after the moor or the last refuge before it. The first road and what is now called Victoria Bridge were built around 1751 by Major Caulfield, who along with General Wade oversaw a vast programme of road building in an attempt to pacify the Highland Glens following the Battle of Culloden, as we learned in our episode on Scarehool. The old military road ran over Mam Carré the way we've come, and beyond the bridge took a high line north across the slopes of the Black Mount to King's House. Its altitude was such for the same reason we take a higher line above boggy areas, plus it was easier for man and beast to ford streams higher up the hill than to wade through rivers lower down on the moor. In the early 19th century, the military road was becoming untenable and was superseded by a new, lower road, courtesy of Thomas Telford, with bridges and easier terrain over the Black Mount. This allowed horse-drawn carriage and later motor access to Inveroran from Bridge of Orchy, bringing the first tourists from the south. Despite its new links to the outside world in the nascent 19th century, however, Inveroran's most regular guests remained those accompanied by a sizable bovine contingent. Dorothy Wordsworth describes a typical scene at Inveroran in 1803 thus, likely while holding her nose. About 7 or 8 travellers, probably drovers, with as many dogs, were sitting in a complete circle round a large peat fire in the middle of the floor, each with a mess of porridge in a wooden vessel upon his knee. King's House, meanwhile, with its crowds of men, drovers, carriers, horsemen and travellers, is described as wretched and dirty. I mean, try spending the night on the moor, love. In the 1930s, the present A82 was built on the other side of Loch Tulla, bypassing the hotel and Victoria Bridge altogether. Today the public B road ends at the Victoria Bridge car park, with the road beyond the Forest Lodge closed off to all but pedestrians. There's no shortage of travellers, however. Victoria Bridge is a very popular area, and the hotel runs a brisk trade, catering for walkers on the West Highland Way and those who come to climb the Munros. The hotel owners have recently carried out extensive renovation work to keep the historic building in top condition and to welcome weary travellers for many years to come. So here we are at the junction. There's a sign there telling you about the public footpath all the way to Glen Coe, which we'll be following in later episodes. For now, we're going to head along here to the base of Stob Ghabhar and set up camp for the night. Let's do it. Well, here we are, making our way through this little copse of Scots pine. We're going to follow the Aban Shearer along here. No Newcastle fans, I didn't just say Alan Shearer, it's Aban Shearer, which is, I suppose it's a good way of remembering it. I'm going to head along here for about a mile, mile and a half, and hit Loch Tulla hut. Well, here we are approaching the Loch Tulla hut, and as you can see there's not much to it, but back in the Victorian era it was actually a schoolhouse. I kid you not. Imagine having to come along here to school every day. Whew. There certainly wouldn't be any problem with childhood obesity. These days it's a mountain hut used by the Glasgow University Climbing Club, so if you're not a member, you're not getting in. But to be honest, I don't really want to. Well, here we are on the mountain path proper, up into the corrie below clachan Stellar, which is the waterfall up there, which does look pretty stellar when it's in full flow. Not a lot of water on it because it's been quite a dry couple of weeks leading up to this. Absolutely baking hot. So the top of this rise looks just about the right place to pitch my tent. Yeah, that'll do nicely. And there we are, home on the range. So until tomorrow, I shall bid you bonne nuit. Good morning. Fantastic day again. Let's head up there. Well, here we are heading up towards the corrie. You can see the path there quite clearly up Stob Ghabhar. Now, in case you're wondering what the stellar thing is all about, if you remember way back in Series 1 when we did the basic Gaelic vocabulary, Stale is a waterfall, thus clachan Stellar means crag of the waterfall. Aptly named, as you'll see. Come on, pour a bit more over. We're going to head up here. And as you can see, there's a little path that snakes away directly up to the lochan in the corrie below Stob Ghabhar. So if you've already done Stob Ghabhar, you can still take this path up towards the corrie in the amphitheatre of Stob Ghabhar, which is rather impressive, as we'll see later on. Well, here we are about to cross a little ford, and as you can see, the path makes its way, pretty obviously, up the south ridge of Stob Ghabhar. Let's smash it! Well, we're about a third of the way up here, and there is another path that goes somewhat more leisurely climb. You should continue along the main path down there, and just switcheroo up here, and you'll get a bit more of a gentle ascent up to about just over the halfway mark further up here. I mean, to be honest, this isn't that bad. It's not super steep or super scrambly or anything like that. It's quite stony and there's a few high steps, but it's really nothing to worry about at all. Over here, the sprawling mass of the Goliath Stob Ghabhar. Well, here we are hitting the zigzaggy bit. The Cruachan range over there looking absolutely fantastic, isn't it? Ben Louis as well. Onward. Well, up here is where it mercifully levels off a little bit to the last third to the summit. Over there, you can see another Goliath Bitchin Nambian, or Glen Coe there. Stob Ghabhar as well. See all the way down to the Druim Liaghart hills there. And the Bridge of Orchy range looking lovely too. And here we are, approaching the summit. Now, Stob Ghabhar has a reputation for being the finest viewpoint of all the Black Mount Hills. Its views to Ranach Mor are kinda second to none. Wawa-wee-wa! Well, now the sun's gone and it's suddenly got very chilly indeed up here. Just goes to show you, if it's a blazing hot day, you can't always count on it being like that at the summit or later on. Right now, we're heading back down the ascent path, and just before it starts to steepen again, we're going to break off to the right towards the rather steep-looking ascent of Stob Ghabhar. Let's do it. Clachan there, which isn't a Munro, and Lavuri, which is a Munro. And as I'll zoom in so you can see the little ski tow hut on the top of it. Yep, you can get towed all the way to the top of it if you've got skis. Otherwise, you're going to have to climb it like we are. Well, here we are down at the Bealach, and as you can see, Stob Ghabhar up there is looking rather dispiritingly tall. It is quite a height drop we've had down here to 600 metres, but hey, that's the name of the game. Let's keep going. What's today generally considered the standard path up the Inveroran is actually the descent route of the classic round of Curan Lochan, which I would have to say offers the definitive experience of Stob Ghabhar for the purist, though as we've seen, the descent down Inveroran would not be pleasant at the end of the day. From point 668, this crosses the Alt Curan Lochan to bear up steep grassy slopes onto the Sron nan Guvas, nose of the fir trees. This is a less intense, but still steep and occasionally exposed descent up the rocky knolls to the broad ridge above, with a final, tapered section that, while nothing as bad as Inveroran, requires confidence in airy situations on often slippery terrain. Once upon the great northern wall of Curan Lochan, the views are expansive. Stob Ghabhar's summit cone draws the walker towards it, with superb views to Glen Coe and Loch Tulla, and the deep bowl of Curan Lochan is an awe-inspiring sight from any angle. The Sron nan Guvas eventually merges with Unich Mór, the titanic northern ridge of Stob Ghabhar that reaches a whopping 6 kilometres all the way up to Glen Etive. From this junction, it's a steep but grassy and relaxed ascent to the summit, with the great granite cliffs of the east face providing a dramatic scene to the left. If you're feeling adventurous, you can then complete the classic Curan Lochan round by descending the Inveroran. Well, here we are back down at the bottom of the corrie, ready to take the other arm. And we're beckoned on our ascent by this great view of the upper couloir there, which wasn't conquered until the very end of the 19th century. You can see why. I wouldn't fancy it. Now that's a Munro, huh? So it begins. The climb of destiny. I'll see you further up there. Well, we've reached a levelling off here after the initial scramble up here, which is pretty steep. And yeah, you need your hands here and there for balance, but nothing too cliffhangery yet. And up there, the Ridge of Death.
Oh, right.
This is an extremely steep, exposed and demanding ascent over ground that makes Ben Cruachan seem like a cakewalk. You'll soon get a feel of entering serious mountain terrain, and I must stress that it isn't a feeling everyone is going to enjoy. As you guys know, I'm not above the odd bout of vertigo myself, and there are sections of this that certainly tested my nerves. If you aren't enjoying the airy grandeur, I would strongly advise you to turn around and consider one of the alternative routes we'll look at shortly, because the ensuing Éanach Éach knife edge section is even more intimidating, and once you're on it, the options for escape are few. Well, that's us here, up on the ridge crest, Éanach Éach. The notched bit is just over this rise behind me. But, yeah, that was quite a workout getting up there. When it started to rain, I mean, the ground is quite wet anyway. There's quite slippery rocks coming up there. Certainly not for everyone. Doesn't really feel that secure when the rocks are, of course, moving underneath you. A lot of shale and scree slopes coming up there. It's at the limit of probably most hill walkers' enjoyment, but yeah, you get your head down, it's soon over with. Talking of which, hopefully this knife edge isn't too sharp. Here we are making our way over the two humps of the Culwar buttress and onward to Éanach Éach. Oh my god! Behold, the Éanach Éach. Here goes nothing. I must confess, I'm yet to see a guidebook that accurately conveys the psychological barrier that this section will represent for many hill walkers, with most I've seen playing it down or lamenting its meagre technical challenge when compared to its infamous namesake in Glen Coe. Let's be real here, the average person will find the sight of this section utterly terrifying. The loose, stony path on the crest at first seems to lead up to a horribly exposed vertical scramble. The good news is that the scrambling is avoided, the bad news is the exposure is not. The exposed section of this ridge is short, but it's still there, and it can't be wished away. Again, if you don't feel confident, this is an absolutely normal human reaction. We all come to the hills for different reasons, and not everyone wants to challenge themselves to the point of self-torture. If you don't like what you see, that's fine, and you can say no, because, as we'll find out shortly, there are other, easier ways up Stob Ghabhar that are no less epic or visually rewarding. Needless to say, in winter conditions, it becomes a far more serious challenge, where you'll need your crampons and ice axe. Without question, the best time to tackle this is in midsummer when it's nice, dry and dusty, rather than the cold, wet and slimy conditions in which we're climbing it. The nasty part is soon over with, and the ridge broadens out as it reaches the summit cone of Stob Ghabhar. Well, thankfully the clouds and rain have departed, and you can see the way we've come up there, with the Éanach Éach, and where it broadens out. Basically it's like this the rest of the way, so easy going, nice. Give you a chance for your legs to stop shaking after that Untitled traverse. The views are opening up to Rannoch Moor again there. Magical. Patchwork quilt of lochans and bog. There it is. The summit of Stob Ghabhar, perched atop this gargantuan arena of Curan Lochan. Just up here is the top of the upper couloir. So if you've come up that way, give yourself a pat on the back. And here we are, approaching the lofty summit of Stob Ghabhar, peak of the goat, or goat peak. 1,090 metres, have some of that, mate. The thrills of Curan Lochan certainly aren't for everyone, and if you'd rather a more leisurely ascent, you can continue along the Avon Shira here towards Glen Etive on the Glen Etive path. From here you can cut up to Clashgur Farm, where an ATV track will take you all the way up to 700 metres. From there we'll follow that silhouetted ridge to the summit of Stob Ghabhar. This is a much quieter, less frequented route that still bears magnificent views and a sense of solitude that can certainly be elusive on the usual Bagger's Path. The quickest way down is to return to the base of the summit cone and continue south down Srone Maul, the Bald Nose, before descending into Cwrnamwch, Corrie of the Pig, to join the Alt Cwrnamwch as it flows towards the precipice of Ansteller. This is a fun, interesting and surprisingly unexposed descent, following the stream as it drops over 3 high steps, with a great sense of space at the end of your day and only a brief scramble near the bottom. From there, a decidedly moist path descends to cross the Alt Togue and return you to the Baggers Highway. Here we are on the old Drove Road, making our way up towards the old settlement of Druim Liaghart on the top of that hill. Now, those who've got a very good memory will remember that that's the birthplace of the Bard of Glen Coe, Duncan Van Mcintyre. So let's head on up there and pay our respect. Back at Inveroran, we learned about Duncan Van Mcintyre, arguably the greatest Gaelic poet of his generation. Yet the biography at the start of his published work, Gaelic Songs, describes his early life only with extreme brevity. Duncan Mcintyre, author of the following poems, was born in Glen Coe, Argyllshire, in the year 1724. The only amusement of his youth was fowling and fishing. Okay. Thankfully that's fowling with a W, but it's still a rather anemic summation of the great bard's formative years. What would it really have been like to grow up in a tiny rural community like this nearly 300 years ago? And here we are. This was his crib. Well, maybe not exactly this one, but it would have been a house like this. In sight there of Inveroran, the subject of his greatest work. As you can see, the cairn is indeed in Gaelic. However, thanks to the magic of video production, I can now tell you what that means. At the dawn of the 18th century, a small community of around 40 tenants, or subtenants, farmed the lands of Druim Liaghart on the shores of Loch Tulla in the united parish of Glen Coe and Inveroran. The descriptor Glen Coe was rather gratuitously used at this time and could mean land anywhere from Rannoch Moor down to Loch Tulla. You may remember from Rise of the Campbells that the parish church for Loch Tulla was located on Inveroran, one of its islets. In 1751, the rent for Druim Liaghart consisted of £8 per year. Under the Celtic feudal system, native residents paid yearly tax, or rent, to the gentleman who held the primary lease on the area from the clan to which it belonged, in a system called a runrig scheme. While it sounds complicated, the runrig scheme formed an important buffer zone between upper and very much lower classes, as we'll see shortly. In this case, the ultimate landlords were the Campbells, who, again as we learned in episode 2, came to control vast swathes of central and southern Scotland by this time. Much of the Highlands was let to friends or relatives of the clan elite, with leaseholders granted lands largely through nepotism, and not, for example, on the basis of merit or agricultural expertise. As if. These leaseholders, merely lower upper class gentlemen who were still considerably richer than Yao, would often sublet areas to the local serfs who would pay a tack, or rent, in exchange for being able to live and work on it, a deal that was often less than equitable. The political arrangement of the society was fairly unsubtle, and there was no such thing as a middle class. The runrig system was a social buffer zone between the extremely rich and the extremely poor that played an important role in maintaining relative social order that, as we'll see, once removed would cause the total collapse of Highland society. The tenants' duties mainly comprised common pasture, sooming, or working out how much livestock could be fed from a certain area of pasture, outrun, the growing of crops, and shealing, which is taking the cattle to the high grassy pastures in the summer. Rent would often be paid in what residents could produce from the land, and if it was a hard winter, life could be unimaginably difficult for those at the bottom rung of the property ladder. Clan culture valued fighting prowess above all else, and consequently the role of land worker was held in relatively low regard. Think of the feudal serfs in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and you'll get a broad idea of the average land worker's social status in feudal society. Landlords often enacted heavy tolls and dues on their tenants, as evidenced by McIntyre's praise for those few who weren't total fascists. Under the feudal system, the clan chief had legal ownership not just of the land, but of its human inhabitants. As well as paying rent through what they produced on the land, the native people were obliged to help maintain the dry stone walls and dikes of the area, and even in some cases to defend it, with young men from the villages often employed as soldiers in inter-clan feuds. It's clear why Duncan McIntyre and children of clachans like Druim Liaghart would have been encouraged to engage in hunting from a fairly young age, given it produced both food and a way to pay the rent. As we can discern from the lavish praise McIntyre later heaped upon his employer, the Earl of Breadalbane, the folk of Druim Liaghart enjoyed a pretty good lot in comparison to some. They lived a happy and busy life, with the summer retreat to the Sheelings a particular highlight. As we saw at Loch Tulla in Glen Lyon, this relocation to the summer pastures was a long-standing tradition and must have provided something to look forward to in the hard winter months. Removal of stock from common pasture during the summer months was necessary for the protection of unfenced crops and to give the pasture of the village outrun a chance to recover. The annual trek to the Sheeling ground had many happy associations, and references to the practice are frequent in Gaelic song. Duncan McIntyre, like other village boys in the Highlands, would have spent several seasons at the Sheeling. He may have acted as herd for a group of Sheelings when he was older, and in his old age he had happy memories of those summer days. In McIntyre's poetry, the old Gaelic word dirry describes the moor or hill area on which cattle pastured, hence the phrase Air dirry, on the dirry. This is the origin of the town name Airdrie. The hut occupied during the season was called Bothan Airy, and this is likely the origin of the modern term bothy, a basic family-sized shelter in the hills. There was no possibility of Duncan Van Mcintyre attending school or receiving any form of formal education in Druim Liaghart. Even if there had been a school in the vicinity at this time, Duncan Van's parents would not have had the means for him to attend, and he was needed for farm work. McIntyre's songs tell of ploughing and harvest, fishing with rod or spear, spinning and weaving, cheese and butter making, life at the Sheeling, fairs, hunting, and much singing, fiddling, piping and dancing. The Ceilidh, a merry and informal meeting of all the locals in the area for an evening of dance and song, performed a vital social function for those in rural communities, because as well as the singing of ancient songs, reciting of old tales, and dancing the long winter nights away, they provided a forum for the discussion of important news, rumours and gossip, an educational experience for the children. It was at the Ceilidhs that children like McIntyre, dependent on conversation for information about the outside world, would have heard of the Jacobite Rising of 1715 and of the rebel prince, Charles Stuart. For context, the failure of the final Jacobite revolution in 1745, led by Charles Stuart, was the death knell for traditional Highland culture. With no feudal system between them, the tenants now had to deal directly not just with ignorant upper-class twits, but ignorant upper-class twits newly incentivised on the new fad of ruthless laissez-faire capitalism. Thanks, Adam Smith. With industrialised production in the cities, there was a demand for wool and animal produce, and vast swathes of land in the Highland were cleared for sheep grazing, an activity with a far larger profit margin than keeping cattle. Those unable to pay the extortionate rents for sheep farming were forced onto less and less fertile ground, until eventually subsistence became impossible, and most rural inhabitants were forced to leave, either emigrating to the new world of the US and Canada, or elsewhere in Britain, Ireland or Europe. This is generally agreed to have been a deliberate system of social cleansing, driven by a colonialist ideology, now supercharged by the cold tenets of free market capitalism. We'll look at the Highland clearances in more detail in later episodes, and for more on the feudal era, links to further resources are provided in this video's description. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, hit like and subscribe to see new episodes as soon as they arrive. Next time we take a walk on the wild side to the heart of Kinglass for another absolute cracker of a Munro, Benanainen. Until then,
Enjoy your adventures.